Welcome, everybody, and I'll just spend a moment to introduce everybody from my left going onwards. So Mercedes Aramendia Falco from URSEC in Uruguay, Alan Davidson from NTIA, Christoph Dean from ANFR, Eiman Mohyeldin from Nokia, and at the end, CK Fung from Axiata. So welcome to you all, and thank you for joining me today at this WRC panel. I'll start off by asking some general questions, and then we'll move into some more specific questions about some of the bands later on. And Christoph, I'm going to start with you today in the middle, if I may, just to ask you in general terms what the biggest issues are for France this time around regarding IMT and mobile at WRC-23.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. So France is convinced of the benefits of harmonization and standardization that have been presented by the director of the Radio Communication Bureau for a better use of spectrum. So the demand for spectrum is huge and still growing, so it is very hard to make decisions on which service should be given spectrum now. As GSM noted in its policy strands, the coexistence between services gets more and more difficult also. So the technical conditions for this coexistence must therefore be determined with very, very realistic studies, and especially for international services. So for us, working at European levels, CEPT level and ETU level is of most importance. It has been said also just before, to share knowledge and choose the best trade-off together. So IMT now is, for good reason, far from the others, the service with the most demanding use. Since 1992, a third of the spectrum below 3.8 gigahertz has been given to in Europe from mobile operators. So one example that we are dealing with in France now is the Olympic Games we are preparing in Paris. In 2012, in London, they had the 3.5 gigahertz band for video mobile links, and we don't have it because 5G got it now for 2 years in France. So we'll use part of the L band that we have freed for the 5G next year because it's not yet been reassigned. So I don't know what they will do for the next Olympic Games, but it seems that there are no band left. So, so for WR3, as they have been mentioned, we are much involved and we contribute in having RSPG opinion at the European level, CPT position at the part of our region, and the big issues will be those that have been presented. So the new bands for the service, the IMT service, which for us is 6 gigahertz, up of 6 gigahertz, but also the technical conditions for all the coexistence of services.
Thank you very much. So, Eiman, I'm going to move to you next and talk about a bit more about the meaning and vision of this WRC for you guys. So, can you tell us a little bit from your equipment vendor perspective why WRC-23 is important to Nokia? How is the decisions that we make at WRC going to impact the performance of the networks that you can offer your customers, and how it's going to affect the benefits that we can bring to consumers?
Thank you very much, Ross, for this question. This is a very good question, and specifically it comes after Mr. Mario had already said that we have to have one standard. And WRC-23 is not important for Nokia. It's even important for the entire industry. It's relevant. It's relevant because you are going to do harmonization of the spectrum, and you are going to have one standard, which in turn, if you look at it from harmonization of the spectrum resources for the mobile connectivity, it turns to be that you are going to have a global economic of scale, that turns into affordability, that turns into the welfare of the citizens. So with the right, if you have the right and sufficient spectrum for the mobile growth, you are going to achieve manifold of harmonization. And this is not only for the consumer, it's enterprise, it's industry. We are going to, with the right spectrum, we are going to respond to their evolution, needs, and what they need from that one. And specifically for this WRC-23, if I look at it, there are several bands that could respond to all those areas, and they could respond in a more sustainable way as well. Let me take, for example, the further harmonization of the C-band and how this is going to evolve. You still have the ecosystem existing, and how you are going to spread this ecosystem, which in turn is going to, your devices is going to be, from a cost point of view, it's going to be affordable. The network as well. It's a win-win issue. Not to forget, 5G is also going to evolve. And you still have the upper 6 gigahertz to discuss. The upper 6 gigahertz, which is the oxygen for 5G advance. And this will also, in turn, affect the network performance. And not to forget about the digital inequality. The low bands, you need the low bands to have the coverage performance. So if I wanted to look at those, I see them, they are driving in the right direction. But I just wanted to bring you back 3 years ago, when we have the COVID. And I recall I was in one of the meetings. I believe it was an African preparation meeting, and I've heard, if I'm not mistaken, and that one African administration, they have made available, when we have this COVID and we have the stress in the networks, they have made available spectrum resources. This had turned into that we have a rapid deployment of the network. And you can remember at that point of time what we have been suffering. We have been suffering from network performance. Yeah, we have been suffering from shortages. Right now we don't have the shortages, but at that point of time, when they get the spectrum, the right spectrum with a rapid deployment, and how this have turned into the work and student life. So these are the points that we have to take, and this is always come from the harmonization and from the network performance. And you still have also to look at the other point, which is also important. As the traffic is increasing, and the traffic is increasing yearly, there is a traffic increase, will make a stress to the network. Yes, you can do technology advances, but technology advances is also is accompanied with the right and sufficient spectrum could respond to that. So let me sum it up. Having access to the low bands and the mid bands will support the evolution of 5G, an efficient network, and also will help to fight this digital inequality. As well, it's going to help the capacity in urban area to increase, and you will have a better consumer, as well consumers. Don't forget about the side of the consumers. Like, for example, you need also some kind of application like the extreme oil industry, which they need the extreme coverage. And for that, you need also low bands. Or you have, for example, the kind of an application which we are currently talking about, this augmented reality and that one. So in that sense, accessing to both low and mid bands really is needed, and for the network performance, for having a better performance, and as well to fight the digital inequality. Coverage and capacity was important.
Thank you very much. Alan, I'll turn to you now, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about achieving policy goals with spectrum. So my question to you is, what are the policy goals that in the US that are being fed by your spectrum decisions, and what are the aims of your national spectrum strategy? How do you expect them to support new mobile services? Can you tell us a bit about the tie-in between spectrum and policy? Thanks, please.
Excellent question. And first of all, thank you for having me and having this great gathering of folks. It's great to be here. And I'll say whether it from ensuring that we are able to make sure that everybody has access to the digital economy, to making sure that we are feeding and promoting deployment of next generation wireless services. Our spectrum policy decisions are foundational to being able to achieve our broader policy goals. And that's the way we're looking at them. And just to tick off a few, it starts, I think, in the US with our goal of making sure we are connecting the unconnected. And we have a major infrastructure project underway in the US to make sure that we're finally bridging the digital divide and reaching everybody. We need to think about our spectrum policy choices in that context too, to make sure that we're feeding that goal. A key piece of that in the US is going to be about making sure that we can complete the build-outs that have begun around 5G and making sure that we've got adequate spectrum to ensure that we are going to be able to do that well. I think it goes broader than just that. We are looking at what a 21st century economy looks like. That includes, for example, we're a spacefaring nation, so making sure that we are dealing with the satellite issues and ensuring we have adequate spectrum available there. There are a huge number of governmental uses of spectrum, not just in the private sector: aviation safety, transportation, national security, weather and climate prediction. All of that has got to be covered in here. Our national spectrum strategy we're launching this year will be designed to address those issues, make sure that we are thinking about a pipeline of spectrum bands and access to be able to power the next set of systems and deployments that we know are coming. I guess the last thing I would say is I'm just talking about a lot of our domestic goals, but I think we look at this clearly within the international context. And our goal, we have a big goal of connecting the unconnected is not just an issue within the United States. Obviously, it's a huge issue globally, and we care quite a bit about that. And I'll just take a half step back to say, it is really kind of an amazing story of the last few decades, how wireless technologies have now really connected, well, billions and billions of people. And there's a lot to feel very proud of. We saw some of the slides earlier. The fact that in many countries, the uptake rate, the subscription rate's well over 100%, right? But we also know that subscription rates in countries can be as low as 12%. And this is a reason for real concern for us, for the reasons we were just talking about, the consumer issue, the question of how are we going to reach the folks who are not yet connected, not yet on these new wireless technologies. And so the history of this has been that standards, harmonization around spectrum choices have powered the economies of scale that have enabled us to connect everyone so far, connect the billions that are connected so far. We need to keep that going, as we were just talking about. And so the stakes are high at WRC. We need to be working together to make sure we can continue this progress.
Thank you very much. Mercedes, I'll turn to you now and ask a slightly similar question in a way regarding WRC decisions. How can WRC help be a force for good in Uruguay, and how can the conference and the harmonization it brings be a help broadband and economic development in your country?
Right. Thank you very much, Ross, for the invitation and also for the question. It's a pleasure for me to be part of the Mobile World Congress and to participate in this great panel. As we all know, mobile connectivity contributes directly for global economic and social development. The demand is growing continuously and firmly, and of course we have to work a lot all together in order to provide quality services for everyone. Also, technology and advance non-stop. We have to provide and to work in order to make a reality technology neutrality, and also to work in transversal action at the same time. I think that everyone here has a very important role to play. I think that we all know that the best way to work is doing everything together, the entire ecosystem working together, having a great dialogue. That is key. And also, I think that spectrum is necessary to enable existing services and also the future services that our societies need. WRC-23, I'm sure that is going to be a force for good for Uruguay and also for the entire ecosystem. We will have the opportunity to update the radio regulation, which is a worldwide international treaty. And of course, based on that, we will have the opportunity to make informed decisions and act in consequence. For example, we will have the possibility to identify frequency bands for IMT, to review spectrum needs and uses, to conduct studies and public consultations, to analyze spectrum needs, and also if we have to refarming, or if we have to harmonize the use, or we have to protect existing services in order from harmful interference. So for sure, WRC will give to all of us the possibility to make better decisions, to coordinate how to work together in the next period, in the next years, and also to stimulate coordinated decision and also better planning, and have more predictability of what's going on, what the existing services need, and also the future. And I think that here we have a great opportunity, and also we have the responsibility to work all together, the entire ecosystem, in order to achieve sustainable development goals. And I think that we really need to have the spectrum needed on time, and that is key to bridge digital divide. Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry. Also, related with harmonization, I think that harmonization is really important. It's really desirable, of course, for us, because we are a really small country. And I think that that's something that we really need to work on. But I think that it's important to remark that we need to confluence multiple interests and needs. And I think that we really want to work, we have to work to achieve real agreements, because we have to not to be perceived as an imposition. And also, as Mario Maniewicz just said, it's really important to build consensus from the beginning. Now, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. CK, I'll turn to you for the next question, if I may. Obviously, being an operator in APAC, the way that the WRC agenda is written this time around, there's less on offer in APAC than there are in some parts of the world. But for sure, the possibilities of harmonization and ecosystem development are still there. Just wanted to ask you what the main issues are that you're focused on as an APAC mobile operator in terms of your future capacity, what you're looking at in that regard at the moment.
Yeah, well, thanks, Ross, for having me here. Some of you may know that at Axiata, we operate in markets where we are considered it to be emerging or even frontier markets. So when we talk about the unconnected or underconnected 2 billion, 3 billion, this is where our population is. And this is where harmonized global spectrum which is globally harmonized, is very important. And at this upcoming WRC, our focus is on the mid-bands. Well, you say to me, CKY is a bit further away, right? And I'm glad Mario brought up this point earlier, just a few moments ago. He said identification of a band for a service is one step, right? It is important, but it's just one step. And the second part is where we find this issue of getting the band allocated for its designated services. It takes a long time. In Asia-Pac, some of our markets, some of the key bands that you take for granted in Europe, say, for example, the 2.6, band 7, is still not free for mobile broadband after decades of it being identified. 700, as Mario said. 10 years ago, the world has moved on and identified it and allocated it. In most of the markets, 700 is not released by regulators for IMT yet. So this is the lag that we see in emerging markets and frontier markets. There's a long time between the WRC process and the moment it comes onto the market for us to put on the radio. So I think while we focus on WRC and it's a bit forward-looking, I always tell my team and the regulators, stakeholders I meet, the WRC process is very important because we need to start now. There's no better time than starting now to identify the bands, because to clear it from incumbency use is a long and hard process, especially in emerging parts of Asia-Pac.
Thank you very much, CK. Mercedes, I think I'll come back to you just to follow up on some of the discussion that we've been having already. So Uruguay is a country with a small population compared to some of the countries that we have here, but it always has a big presence in the international fora, certainly at WRC, in CETEL, the Americas regional group as well. Always is putting a lot of effort into these international discussions. So for you, I think we've heard a little bit about the importance you place on international harmonization. But what importance do you place on the ability of smaller countries, countries with smaller markets, I should say, to make themselves heard at the ITU?
Well, thank you for the question. As I already said, international harmonization for us is really, really important. We are just 3.5 million people, so imagine that it's very hard for us if we to have the possibility to access to good cost of the devices, to have harmonization, and of course attend what's going on worldwide and also in our region. Why this? I think that is obvious because of the benefit of scales, and of course because we need interoperability of devices, services, and uses. But again, I think that what we really have to work on is on real agreements. And that's why for us it's really important to participate actively. We have to be really proactive in order to make our opinion to be heard for everyone, because otherwise it's hard to say that harmonization is a real agreement, otherwise we don't have any other option. That's true. So, but I'm sure that this kind of instance and also WRC-23 are great opportunities to help us to have dialogue, to exchange positions, and to try to work together in order to define the best way to advance all together in order to contribute directly in the global development.
Thanks very much. Eiman, back to you for the next one, I think. But thinking about the possibilities of WRC and looking at the risks of an unsuccessful WRC. So for you, what applications are at risk if we go across the board on agenda item 1.1, 1.2, etc., all the IMT agenda items, and the result is no change? What's at risk? What do we lose? What applications do we lose? And what will be the loss to consumer services if no agreement is found?
Very good question. I cannot name an application by itself, but failing to reach an agreement in WRC-23 and having the sufficient spectrum for the development, definitely it will lead to certain kind of consequence, not speaking about the application itself. First of all, the further development of 5G and the success of which we have already living in 5G and 5G advance, and consequently the 6G development will be hindered. Not to talk also about digitalization, industry digitalization, and how is this going to be hampered. But adding also to that one is sustainability aspiration is going to be endangered if we fail to reach the agreement. We have a say that no green without digital. So let me give you one example for the low bands. For example, let's take the low band. If we don't reach an agreement for the low bands, and we have failed to come to an agreement, I could see that, for example, this digital inclusion is going to be in danger. Countries will fall behind their social agreement and social goals and aspiration, and we are not going to provide the digital skills. I've heard Mr. Tariq Alawadi speaking about there are areas which you need also to educate them, to give them some skills, and this is one of the things that it's not going to happen. And let me turn back again to, for example, industry, transportation. The development in transportation is going to stop because they are not going to develop. But not even this is the low band, but if I go back again to the C-band and the upper 6 gigahertz, all the application which we are currently speaking about and which we are dream about, like XR, EVR, and other application that is needed for the further development of the consumer, the industry, their development is going to stop because there will be no certainty. There will be the uncertainty for the developer and for the service provider that they are not going to have the right resources and the sufficient resources. So in that sense, there is no application per se, but there is several consequences if we don't happily reach an agreement at WRC-23. It's industry, consumer, enterprises. Their development are going to be hindered.
Thank you very much. I think time to move on a little bit to some more band specifics. And Alan, I'll ask you about some of your experiences on mid-band in the US now. Obviously, the US sits in a position of being one of the leading 5G markets. I think there's a few people that would like that crown, but certainly we've been hearing a lot about top 10 these last couple of days, so definitely top 10. Obviously been fed by some innovative approaches and a real concentration on 3.5 gigahertz mid-band spectrum, among other things. I was hoping you could tell us some of the challenges about getting that to market and what comes next in US mid-band.
It's a great question. I think there are no easy spectrum allocation decisions left for any of us, really, but demand continues to increase, and so that, of course, is the big challenge for us. There's no really unused portions of our spectrum allocation table here in the US. So one of the things we've really had to think about has been about new sharing techniques, new licensing techniques, and I'll give you a good example is the 3.5 gigahertz band example of what we've done in the US. We found a lot of promise in that band, but also a set of federal radar systems that were using the band. And the NTIA, my organization, along with our Federal Communications Commission, worked together to develop some dynamic sharing techniques, and CBRS turned out to be a very useful way for us to make spectrum available in this band while also being able to respect the incumbent uses that we had there. And I say that just because it's a good example of what we've been able to do. We've ultimately been able to make 530 megahertz available in the 3 gigahertz range. In terms of what's next, we're studying the lower 3 gigahertz and what we can do there. We've got some mid-band spectrum, the other mid-band spectrum that's coming online now, the 2.5 gigahertz that's coming online. We've got a big push on 6 gigahertz unlicensed spectrum, of course, in the United States and other places. We're studying other bands to see what will come next. And really, along the way, what we've been trying to do is develop this toolbox, dynamic sharing, really new spectrum engineering techniques. We need to evolve and adapt. It's not going to be the same way we've always done this, and so that's been our experience.
All right, thank you very much. Christoph, I was thinking about the way you're looking at mid-bands and the WRC. What's at stake as far as you're concerned in the debate on IMT identification in the upper 6 gigahertz band? What are your plans in France, and are there other options you're looking at for mid-band expansion other than 6 gigahertz?
So first, we have to see if there are conditions for the coexistence with incumbent service. The FSS satellite for us is very important and must be protected. So we contribute last year with a study that concludes that sharing the band was possible with limited constraints. So that's the first step for using this band. Second, we discuss at European level, and we agree on defining the best usage for this band, but after WRC. So we have to have IMT identification at WRC so that we have relevant conditions and error provisions so that we can move forward in our discussions just after that WRC. And third thing, which is the last, this band appears to us as the only band left under 20 gigahertz, which is something very important. So to launch a new mobile technology. So we don't see another option for 6G, for example, in mid-band. So we think that in Europe, the decision on the upper 6 GHz band may be linked to the 6G roadmap. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see in December this year, I guess. So, CK, turning back to you and your position as a mobile operator in emerging markets, sort of middle income, high to middle income countries. As far as you're concerned, is this new capacity, of a differing importance to mobile operators in other regions? Do you have more limited options than perhaps very high-income countries, or is new capacity the only route available to you for your networks? How does that affect your network build out?
Well, we always need more spectrum. Number one, for better and more affordable broadband services. I think most of our, even you'd be surprised, most of our emerging markets, our average GB per user per month is touching 30. These are very low ARPU countries. Cambodia is 28 GB today, right? That's higher than some Western European countries, but yet at 1/5 the ARPUs. So we need spectrum, even now it's 4G or 5G or 6G later on, to make sure that, to help us to ensure that the production cost per GB is the lowest possible. That's number one. Number two, fixed wireless access, as some of the earlier speakers alluded. In emerging Asia Pacific, we are mobile-first countries. We can't find fiber, and not to the extent where we see it in advanced markets. And where there is fiber, there's only one provider, and these are the big cities in these central business districts. There's only one option. So for SMEs, for homes, we need fiber. Additional spectrum for fixed wireless access because we need to generate competition, and this is for the long term, where as many emerging markets also are desperate to climb onto the digital economy bandwagon because they see digitalization as a means to leapfrog their industrial and economic journey, right? And that's where all the B2Bs, the SMEs, digitalization, all these initiatives need good and affordable broadband connectivity. And the best way to deliver it in emerging Asia Pacific is through mobile. Unfortunately, that is the case. Yeah.
Thank you very much, CK. I think I'm going to turn to low band now, just as the final part of our discussion, and ask a couple of questions on that front. And perhaps, Alan, I'll start with asking you about this. Looking at low band spectrum was looked after in the US, obviously, with your 600 megahertz auction from a couple of years ago now. And how has that helped the policies you were talking about earlier of digital equality, connecting the unconnected? What's the next steps for the US to ensure that parity between urban and rural?
Right. Well, very quickly, I'll just say it's a key part of our strategy, and it's been very beneficial. We have this broad goal, connecting everybody, using spectrum well and lowering the barriers for entry, making spectrum usage more cost-effective is key to that. We've had a couple of different approaches, of course, to supporting wireless broadband. The low band 600 megahertz has been really important and will be impactful in terms of our ability to reach rural areas particularly. But we've also invested, of course, in a portfolio mid-band in the 3 gigahertz, as we were discussing, millimeter wave too, that we're thinking about. And I'll say one other thing, the FCC, our Federal Communications Commission, has been technology neutral and allowed carriers, for example, to refarm their 3G spectrum and use it for 5G, and that flexibility has been really important. So I think you can just expect more continued diversity of approaches that you heard me talk about as we look to the future, and making sure that we've got a range of tools that people can use in a toolkit.
Great, thank you very much. And Christophe, for you, what's the expected evolution of the UHF band in France beyond TV? And how do you see Europe developing in a flexible way to allow people to change when they're ready between the uses of digital terrestrial TV and mobile in the UHF band?
So for the moment, we already had the 2 digital dividends in France, and we tried to have rural IMT to rural areas, and it doesn't seem to be that much a band problem. It's more an economical problem than a technical one. So for the moment, the access to the band, to the UHF band, is guaranteed by law to TV and PMSC until the end of 2030. So and it's the same in Europe, but not the very same. But there is a legal priority to TV and PMSC below 694 megahertz until 2030. So there is flexibility, but you have to give priority to those that deliver TV. So as the countries are not that large in Europe, and you have to give priority at the borders. It's not that simple. So for the moment, it's a discussion that we'll have after this conference.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I think just time for a couple of last final questions. And Eiman, I'll turn to you on low band as well. We've mentioned this a couple of times. I know Nokia has been very actively involved in some of the low band discussions. So what's your hope for the UHF discussions in EMEA, in the ITU Region 1 that we're having? Do you expect the 600 megahertz band to start spreading beyond North America anytime soon? What are your expectations for that as a vendor?
My expectation is that we advocate for mobile allocation for the entire full band, but we see as well the interest from numerous countries in Middle East and Europe, and they would like to have the 600 megahertz deployed. And this is, we see the very good chance to grab it because of the existence of the ecosystem. The existence of the ecosystem, that means affordable devices. Affordability and cost is a crucial one. But we have also to look back again to Europe and look at the Europe again. And let's think about this UHF in a more flexible way. And think about it that in the future, for the one who have already deployed the 700 megahertz, they could use the 600 megahertz or let's say the UHF band for a blanket coverage for 6G. And they can do this in a flexible manner. So we have to think about flexibility approaches for this. And sure, we have to make flexibility is one thing, but we have to advocate for mobile allocation at the WRC-23, co-primary mobile allocation for the full band, and flexibility are the key.
Yeah.
And the availability of the ecosystem that will drive the market.
Thank you. Thank you. And just, Mercedes, I'll turn to you for a final question, and I'll make this one more general, looking into the future, I think, a little bit. I know you're planning your 5G processors in Uruguay, and you have plans for an auction coming up very soon. But looking into the future, beyond that, what are your plans for your roadmap beyond the current auction, and what spectrum do you believe is going to be important at this WRC and going on into the later part of this decade? Give us a vision of your crystal ball. Yeah.
As you know, the agenda items for WRC-23 are many, and they will cover many frequency bands and services. For us, nowadays, we are working on to develop a 3.5 gigahertz auction. And after that, we will need to work in complementary frequencies as millimeter bands, and also to analyze the best way the best method to do it, if it's going to be on action or maybe beauty contents. Also, we have to be very attentive of what's going on worldwide and also in Region 2 related to 6 gigahertz and also 10 gigahertz. But of course, as a spectrum regulator, we have to be aware of what's going on in all the bands. So for us, what will happen in WRC, it will help us as a guide to continue defining our roadmap. Thank you.
That's great. Well, thank you all very much for your questions today. It's been enlightening for me, and I hope it's been the same for you in the audience. We've really appreciated you joining us today to talk about WRC-23. The themes that the GSMA that we've been bringing into this conversation throughout Mobile World Congress are very simple. We don't want to leave anyone behind. We want to be for the benefit of billions, not just for the benefit of the wealthy, not for the benefit of people in towns, but for the benefit of everybody. We don't think we're doing 5G well unless we're putting it into the hands of all people, and that's why we see this WRC-23 as an opportunity to make sure that we get 5G right and correct some of the wrongs that have been existing in the connectivity world in previous generations. We believe that 5G can be for all, and we believe that a good way of boosting this is at WRC-23. So thank you very much to my panel, and perhaps if you can put your hands together and show your thanks to them as well. We appreciate you joining us today. Wishing you a very good night, and thanks for joining us. Goodbye.